It is time for the ultimate beginner's guide for Dragon Age The Veilguard. I've got tips, tricks, best companion skills, upgrading and workshop advice, plus how to unlock that cheeky true ending and post-credit scene. Let's go! Before we get started, if you want help creating your character, like picking your class or your faction, I have entire videos that break that stuff down, which I'll link here. But beginner's tips, let's go! We'll start with those juicy skill points, as you're going to earn a ton of them throughout your journey. You'll level up by defeating enemies and completing quests. Now, you'll unlock your specialization at level 20, and then the first major node after that will unlock at level 30, then the final one will unlock at level 40. You can freely respec your skill points either individually or the entire skill tree for free at any time. I have multiple videos out breaking down the classes, and I will have plenty of class guides coming out after launch as well. So if you're struggling to pick a class, I will link one of those videos for you here. But for your companions, they will actually level up based on your bond with them. Now, to increase your bond, you need to take them with you out into combat encounters to complete quests, etc. Or by doing things for them, that will increase your bond with them. And then when their bond levels up, they will gain 2 skill points that you can then spend in their respective skill trees. Speaking of companions, they are crucial in Veilguard inside and outside combat. In combat, they are hugely important for timely heals and buffs, as well as simply priming and detonating targets. More on that specific thing shortly. But when you're at the lighthouse, you can check your map to see if a companion wants to talk to you. There are different types of talking to them. So there are timed conversations, which are only available at that specific time. So you obviously want to go and do that immediately. There are new quests that they could give you indicated by the quest icon, or they could simply just want to chat indicated by the yellow speech bubble. But you can check these different types in the legend when you're looking at the map, or if you're just running around the lighthouse, their lanterns will be on if they actually want to talk to you in their various rooms. I do highly recommend that you also complete the companion quest. They will unlock new explorable areas of the map and also unlock new skills. Like in Harding and Emmerich's cases, their unique skills, like say Harding being able to control rock platforms or Emmerich being able to calm spirits, these only unlock by completing their companion quests, and that will allow you to explore more of the map and find secrets. So definitely do these as soon as they become available to you. Companions can also be given gifts. Now, typically you'll find a gift for a companion at their specific faction vendor. Say for example, if you're looking at the Veil Jumpers, they will have a gift for Balara, who is a part of the Veil Jumpers. These gifts will then increase their bond, which can then lead to skill points. The same vendor will also sell quality gear for that specific companion. So say for example, if you're using a lot of Balara, you probably want to spend some time leveling up the Veil Jumper faction vendor, because they will have some good gear for Balara for you to actually take out. It's also good to check these vendors, as they typically have the revive trinket that allows a companion to revive you if you are defeated in combat. Hugely useful to have equipped to your companions, because a free revive can never set you wrong. Several of Rook's and the companions' abilities will apply primers that can then be detonated by other abilities. Timing these correctly in combat is crucial to your success if you want to take on some of those harder challenges, like some of the champion mini bosses or some of the other secret encounters you can find in the game. You'll also need to balance your team to ensure you have both primers and their respective detonators available. Now, primers are skills that have an ability to set up for a detonation. Now, you can see this when you're reading the skills, if they do have them and what that actual primer is for, whether it's weakened, overwhelmed, or sundered. These three have a bit of a rock, paper, scissors type synergistic relationship with the 3 classes that both Rook and the companions can be, from Rogue, Warrior, and Mage. When you are setting up your player Rook, regardless of your class, you want to make sure you're using abilities that have these either applies or detonates effects on them, so you can then synergize with your companions to deal those massive explosions of damage. And there are certain equipment as well as skills that can then further buff those detonations to add additional effects, which you definitely want to be triggering, as they make such a difference. I won't go too deep into the nitty-gritties around which companion and Rook player character can do what. Generally speaking though, having one of each class is a good decision to have, as that will allow you to cover all of the 3 applies and detonates. For example, using a rogue Rook here, my Rook has the ability to apply Sundered with Toxic Dash, and then I can detonate Overwhelmed with Pilfer. Now, because of that, I want to have a warrior with me that can apply Overwhelmed so that I can detonate it with Pilfer, as well as having a mage that can detonate the Sundered effect that I'm applying with Toxic Dash, and then Conveniently, all the mages can also apply Weakened, which a warrior like Davron or Tash can actually detonate as well. So that then covers all three of the primer and detonation effects. Bringing up the ability wheel will allow you to see if there is a combo opportunity available to you, but you can also trigger these by holding the left trigger in real-time combat, which is typically how I choose to do it. You'll be constantly opening chests throughout Veilguard that either provide you with new pieces of gear or upgrade the quality of your existing pieces. Because these gear drops aren't static, it can be hard to find specific upgrades that you're looking for. What I would recommend is to check faction vendors for specific upgrades and consider the relevant themes of those factions. For example, for my Duelist Necrotic Damage Rogue, the Mournwatch faction vendor has plenty of necrotic themed gear, as well as the Antivan Crows have a lot of rogue themed gear as well. So upgrading those main factions vendors first is what you should focus on. Now you can increase your reputation with those factions by selling your valuables to their vendor, as well as doing side quests for them in that region or side quests for their respective companion. If you are looking to chase like specific pieces of gear, the only real way you can do that is via the unique chest. Now these are represented differently on the map. They have like a unique chest icon, and typically to unlock them, you'll either need to face a certain boss or solve a certain puzzle in order to unlock that unique chest. Keep an eye out for these on the map when you do see them, but also consider you may need to return to the area at a later date in order to be able to unlock them, dependent on if you've unlocked all of those companion skills that allow you to manipulate the world, or there might be quests that have certain areas of the map that are unlocked until you complete those quests. Just upgrading the quality of your gear that you find out the world also isn't enough. You'll need to upgrade its stats and like its level at the workshop at the lighthouse. Now I wouldn't spend all of your materials here early game until you've really landed on a specialization and a build that you're choosing to progress. The one thing that I would always keep at max upgrade, however, is your healing belt. Now there are multiple healing belts that you find, but keeping this at max upgrade is really beneficial as it defines how much HP Rook's potion restores, plus the other effects that it does give. But this is crucial because the more HP you can get from your potions, like the better, right? And this is the main way you'll increase it. And you will notice that your healing belt will significantly fall behind as you level up your Rook, mainly because your total health will increase, but you can also increase your total health in other ways that very quickly you'll notice that healing flask isn't healing as much as it was before. You can also upgrade the Caretaker's Workshop by collecting mementos in the world to increase his power, as well as buying them from certain vendors. Enchantments will unlock after a few upgrades from the Caretaker as well. Now, the higher the workshop level, the more enchantments will be available to you, as well as being able to put them in your companion gear. This you can significantly use as soon as it becomes available to you, as it doesn't have that same amount of material cost as upgrading your overall stats. Don't fast travel everywhere or ignore the crossroads. Now, while fast traveling to locations is quick and it also restores all of your potions, by the way, I highly recommend you don't skip or fast travel the crossroads. The crossroads is like the game's main explorable area that contains a ton of upgrades. The Fenharel altars will give you a skill point. What you need to do is activate the statue and then find the like spirit dreadwolf that'll be hanging around. You go to that location and you'll get a skill point. And the Evanurus altars give you 100 HP if you shoot down the like glowing circly things that will appear once you activate the statue. These are also found in other areas as well. They're not just found in the crossroads, so do keep an eye out for them. The crossroads will develop over time. They will add new vendors that you can find, as well as new areas to explore, especially if you're defeating the blighted champions that you can find in each area. Each of the main explorable areas will have a blighted champion that when you defeat them will drop a champion essence, which you can then take back to the crossroads to unlock new areas of the map. These areas can contain major optional bosses that drop unique gear, as well as other hidden secrets that Solus definitely doesn't want you to find, and I'll leave you to discover that for yourself. Now, a couple of combat tips for you guys. I highly recommend that you bind companion skills to the same buttons. Now, what I mean by that is having their skill 1 as like their primer skill 2 as their detonator, and then like a miscellaneous spot, whether that being a class buff like a heal or a weapon damage buff, whatever it is in that third slot. What this will allow you to do is quick cast much easier, as you don't need to remember the names or the specific effects of each skill. Like what this means is that I always know that that first skill is a primer and that second skill is a detonate. So when I'm just like flowing in combat, I don't have to bring up the ability wheel to like stop time and make sure I'm using the right ability. I can just press that button to use it in real time, and I know that that skill 2 is always going to be that detonate for all of my companions. It really helps with that overall flow of combat. If you're having trouble with the difficulty, or maybe you want it to be harder or easier, well, you can just change several of the combat settings at any time in the options menu. I've mostly been playing between normal and hard, although I do recommend you consider increasing your parry timing windows if you are struggling with them. You can do that individually in the combat settings. While you're here as well, consider changing the combat UI if you find it a little too cluttered. You can turn off the damage numbers, even lower how big they are, or their transparency, and a bunch of other settings. I do recommend that you check out those settings and find what really works for you, as it can get a little cluttered in combat when there's lots of enemies on screen and lots of things happening. Start with the workshop, as that's one of the most important. Now, the workshop is found at the lighthouse. Now, the caretaker runs the workshop, and in order to upgrade the workshop, which will then allow you to upgrade all of your gear and extra rank, you will need caretaker power. Now, you gain caretaker power either by buying mementos from random side vendors and other like faction vendors you find out in the world, or just by finding those mementos while you're out exploring. They typically have like a blue glow when you do find them, and you'll get a little bit of caretaker power. The higher ranks take forever to get, and you definitely will need to be buying some of these mementos in order to max out your caretaker rank. By the way, your maximum level of gear that you'll find out in the world is actually tied to your workshop level. So upgrading the ranks of your workshop level is hugely important, but that's not something I would be thinking about in the early game, because you probably want to be spending that gold on actually upgrading yourself rather than buying these mementos to upgrade your caretaker. Now, something to think about as well, speaking of saving some of that gold and those materials, you use those same materials that you use to upgrade your gear at the workshop to actually upgrade the faction vendors. So there is a balance that needs to be struck there as to which vendors you're going to upgrade to get those higher quality or unique pieces from the faction vendors, but then also upgrading the stats on your gear and trying to find that balance. In the early game, I would be leaning towards buying the pieces from the faction vendors until you really have a good grasp on what your build is going to be and what you're leaning into, whether that be a particular damage type or a particular specialization that leans into X and Y. You really want to find what that build is first, and then start spending those points into the workshop and upgrading its rank, and then upgrading the stats on those pieces of gear that you want to actually keep and use. Another thing to note here is when you're upgrading gear, uniques that you find throughout the world, they can't actually be upgraded. So whatever the stats are on those uniques, those are static. You can't actually change those. So figuring out what that trade-off is, as a lot of the uniques obviously have unique effects, but they have a lower base damage typically if you're using, say, weapons or like a bow in this case, right? So figuring out the balance there between, say, having the higher base damage potential of these fully upgraded pieces when you like max them out and you've got like the legendary rarity compared to the unique effects, there's a balance to be struck there and figuring out which one works best, but it's just something to think about. Another thing that you can do at the workshop is enchantments. Now, eventually you will unlock the enchantments. It does take a little while to progress through the story, but at a certain point, once you do talk to the caretaker relatively early in the game, he will unlock the enchantments for you. Now, uniques can actually be enchanted even though they can't be upgraded, and higher workshop levels unlock better enchantments for your gear, as well as unlocking enchantments for your companion's gear. Now, depending on your build and your overall setup, the best enchantments are really going to be different, but for armor enchantments, I do really like the 10% defense and the 10% health, because it's just a flat 10% that you're getting for defense and health, right? Like they can't really go wrong there. But otherwise, for weapons and like your other pieces of gear, it is really build dependent. So an example here for like my ranged rogue, I'm going to be wanting to increase my arrow regeneration because, you know, I'm going to be using a lot of arrows, or if in my necrotic build, I want that extra necrotic damage and things like that. There's a balance to be struck there. And then that also leads into your companion setups as well, right? When you're thinking about how you're enchanting your companion gear, you want to make sure that they're complementing your main build, and those higher levels of the workshop, you can get some really good additional effects that will apply when you attack my target. So that attack my target, you can attack and get like, you know, a burning stack on enemy, or, you know, taunting them for free, whatever that actual effect is. You can really synergize with your build setups and allowing those effects to trigger. And don't forget as well, you can actually enchant your skills when you're in the enchant screen. If you tab over one level, there's actually your abilities there that you'll be able to enchant to add various effects like increasing their radius for AoE spells or reducing their cooldown and a bunch of other cool things. One more thing for the workshops, and this is the most important, is that you can actually get a discount on the cost of upgrading your gear at the workshop. In order to do this, you need to solve a puzzle at the lighthouse. Now, this puzzle is solved by having certain statues face each other. The first two statues are actually found directly above, like the entrance way where you say walk outside to see the caretaker. Above that, there are two statues there. You need to make them face each other, and you'll see like a little effect trigger to make sure you've got that right. And then if you head over just above the stairs where Manfred typically stands, you'll see another statue here. You need to make this face away from the building, and you'll actually be able to see on the other side the other statue. So you can see that statue, make this one face that way, and then go run over to Lucanus's platform where he hangs out, and you'll be able to see the other statue there and make that face the first one back towards where you came from. That'll trigger the second, and then the third one is these two statues that are located on Nev and Balara's platforms. The Nev one is actually underneath where she is, like her room. You need to go under there and then make it face towards Balara's area, and then vice versa for Balara's. You need to travel over there, make that face towards Nev's, and that'll trigger the last one. Now what this does is it opens a door in like that main hallway area, and inside that area you'll actually see there are two wisp like statues that you need to activate. The first wisp is actually located in that room, and the second one is located where those first statues are that we were just talked about. You need to go and grab the wisp there and bring it down. That'll activate that next door, and then you walk through that door, and then there is a little item that you can trigger which will like restore the big floaty thing in the middle of the lighthouse, and that will then unlock that discount at the workshop. So you definitely want to do this before you've spent a lot of those materials on upgrading any of your gear, because while it's only like say 1 or 2 different material pieces for each thing, it does actually make quite a difference. The Black Emporium vendor is back in the Veilguard. Now this vendor you will unlock by talking to the caretaker at a certain point in the story. This conversation with the caretaker triggered about part 6 or 7 throughout like the main story. Let me know in the comments exactly when this triggers. If I'm not sure if there's like a specific thing you need to do or like upgrade level, or if it's a part of the story. I haven't got here on my other 2 characters yet or got this to trigger. But what will happen is by talking to the caretaker, you'll get an invite to the Black Emporium, and for me that was at Docktown. Now essentially you just need to follow the quest marker. It'll tell you exactly where you need to go, and then that's where you'll find the vendor. Now this vendor will have some unique pieces to unlock. It also has Harding's gift if you are looking to give Harding her gift, and a few other pieces that you'll be able to grab, and some unique materials. They do have quite a large inventory compared to the other vendors. The other interesting part here as well is that the currency you trade isn't typically gold. You'll buy these pieces with that ethereal currency that you do find throughout the world. So a lot of these pieces aren't consuming that precious gold, so you'll be building up that currency, and this is the main way you'll spend it. There are some other vendors as well, like in the Crossroads there are those spirit vendors that will use the same currency as well, so just keep an eye on that currency as it is different to the others. But it does make a good difference to buy pieces from these or those spirit vendors, because then it's not consuming the gold that you'll be using at say the faction vendors, or say, you know, if you buy mementos from here, it's also not consuming that same effect. There is a couple of things I want to touch on at the end here, and one is like farming specific pieces of gear, as it's really hard to find pieces of gear that fit between like specific builds. Say for my necrotic damage rogue that like I've talked about is like my main build for my rogue, it was really hard to find pieces that are actually relevant to my set, that are boosting my necrotic damage or giving me necrotic weapons, whatever that effect is. I think something to consider here is that the themes of the different faction vendors. The Mournwatch vendor, for example, obviously they're necromancers. They have a lot of necrotic based gear. So by spending the time to do the side quests there and leveling up my faction reputation so that I can then max out that vendor, not only to get the unique, but those higher pieces that they do have available, was a really beneficial thing that I found. If I was running, say, a ranged build, like I would have spent more time with the Veil Jumpers because they have some really good range setups, but upgrading those main faction vendors is the key thing here. Now, you want to sell your valuables to those specific factions that you want to upgrade as well, because that will give you faction strength. It obviously gives you gold to spend at that vendor, but the faction strength is really important because it does take a long time to max these out, especially if you don't have, say, the background that's matching with that faction to get you those extra like reputation points. Selling your valuables at those specific vendors can really increase the amount you're going to get and help you max those out more quickly. And the last thing I want to touch on is uniques. There are unique chests and they are marked differently on the map. You can actually see when you bring up the map, they have a different icon, and most areas have like 1 or 2. These are typically locked behind a boss or puzzles. Something to think about here is that for the most part in the early game, you won't be able to go and actually find these because the areas of the map that these will actually be located at are locked behind companion quests or like later side quests that you can't get until later on. So don't try and like go and hunt these out too early in the game, but a lot of them are then locked either behind a puzzle, and then the last one is often locked behind like finishing a faction's quest line. You'll just like happen to find it in like that last area for a lot of them as well. And there is a few that are also just locked behind longer quest chains or available at the crossroads, but typically wanting to hunt these uniques is something you should be doing, as they often have some really fantastic gear behind them. We'll start with not skipping the crossroads. Now, while fast traveling is an easy way to get around and it does restore your potions, I do highly recommend that you spend time in the crossroads for several reasons. The first is that it is the biggest of like the exploration-y areas in the game. There's a lot of secrets to be found in here. There's a lot of chests to unlock. There's a lot of uniques. There's also Fen'Harel altars for skill points, as well as the Evanurus altars that once you have shot down the shiny glowy things, you get 100 HP. The crossroads will develop over time. Like they actually gain like spirit vendors that will have things that you can unlock from them, like say mementos. You buy mementos and you'll gain caretaker power that you can use to then uplift your rank of the caretaker workshop. They also sell gear and like other useful things. The main one to pay attention to is the blighted champions. Now every region will have a champion, and when you defeat that champion, you'll get champion essence that you can then take back to the crossroads. That will unlock a new area of the map. Inside these areas of the map, you can typically find like very powerful mini bosses or secrets about Solus's past, which I won't go into, or plenty of other things, but there's plenty to discover there. So I do recommend that when you go to those regions and you do find those champions, that you do defeat them, get those essences, and then take them back to the crossroads. The big problem that I had with gear sort of early on when I was just opening a bunch of chests is that it's just RNG, right? You don't really know what you're going to get. And then I realized that there are unique chests that you can not necessarily farm, but you can find them much easier by paying attention to them on the map. Now they are marked differently, and they do have like when you're in those areas and you can see like how many chests or X and Y altars there are, uniques will be listed differently. So you can actually find these and sleuth these out. When you're exploring different areas, they are often like a larger puzzle or a boss that you'll need to clear in order to unlock the chest. Now, for the most part, there is like one chest in these areas that's just like out that you'll find while you're like exploring and you complete a puzzle and you get it. The last chest is typically from completing the major story arc to do with that faction in that region, and at the end of that you'll get like the last unique chest for that area if there are two of them. But uniques are definitely the best gear in the game. It's also the best way to get consistent upgrades, because it's very hard to get like guaranteed gear drops. Now we're going to switch up and talk about companions for a little bit, because they are quite crucial to the overall game. Now while you are at the lighthouse, you can see when they want to interact with you via either the lantern above their room or by bringing up the map. You'll see if they have an icon. Now this could be a timed conversation that's only available at that time, so definitely go and do it. It could be a quest and it'll be indicated by just having a little quest icon, or they simply just want to chat with you, indicated by the yellow circle, which does sometimes lead to a quest as well. And we do highly recommend that you complete these companion quests for a couple of reasons. One, it will unlock new explorable areas in any of like the regions of the maps, as like those areas will then unlock additional doorways for more areas to explore. But then also for say Harding and Emmerich's quest, their unique skills that you use to like interact with the environment. Say for Harding, it's to control those rock platforms, and for Emmerich, it's to calm spirits. They only unlock by completing those companion quests, and you'll need those if you want to actually complete everything that's in those explorable areas and be able to unlock those secrets, find those unique chests, etc. This will also lead to something very important, which is their Veilguard skill. But there's actually a mistake with the Veilguard skills as well. That mistake is that, did you know there are two variants of those Veilguard companion skills? So when you complete their story, you'll get a massive passive buff skill, which is that center icon on their skill tree, but they also come with a unique armor piece. Depending on the decision that you make at the end of their storyline, there are two variants of the armor and the skill. Now, an important thing to note here is that if you're trying to say pick a certain armor piece or pick a certain skill, when you go into your load game section, there will be a unique like temporary decision save or temporary chapter save, where the game will automatically make a save just before you make that decision. So a good tip here is to pick whichever option you want and then follow that all the way through. You'll get the Vanguard skill, you'll get the armor, and you can see, oh, do I like this one, not like this one? And then you can go back to make that decision again by loading that save, make the other decision and see which one you prefer. Also, you can just make decision based on roleplay, right? You don't have to try and min-max your gear, but just wanted to point out that there are two variants of the gear and the skill, but you can only get one per playthrough. Speaking of companion setups, your primers and detonators are super important to combat, not only because of the massive damage outputs they do, but also you can add additional effects to detonations that can then say heal you or give you various buffs, etc. Something that I found with all of these companions is I was often switching between companions regularly, trying to complete companion quests, or say, you know, if I'm doing a certain quest for the Veil Jumpers, I feel like I should have Balara with me because she's a part of that faction, right? An issue that I quickly ran into is that I didn't remember which one of their skills did what. So something that I recommend doing is in the companion screens is setting up their skills in a certain way. For me, that was having the first skill always be the primer skill that applies a certain effect, the second skill being a detonation skill that always detonates an effect, and then the third skill being like a class buff. That could be, say, healing like the mages have, it could be increasing your damage for a period of time like the rogues have, or the taunt that the warriors have, whatever that third skill may be. But by doing that, what I found is that I didn't need to use the ability wheel as much. I could just then use like the left trigger on the controller to bring up like the real-time version of that and just quickly then trigger to say, oh, I know I need to prime this because I want to detonate it with this, or if I've used an effect, I know that that detonation is always going to be that same button regardless of which warrior companion I'm using, which mage companion I'm using, etc. I just found that that really helped with my combat flow. But I've got two more for you, and they are both extremely important and slightly spoilery, but I'm going to be doing my best to avoid the spoilers. The first one, there is a very important quest that you must do, not only for the lore implications that you do find out at the end of quest, but it is also very important to the ending, but I won't explain any more about that specific part. I'll just tell you how to get the quest. So when you first interact with the Inquisitor, he will give you a wolf statue that you can then interact with the murals at the lighthouse. Now, this is the first of those wolf statues. It will tell you some history about Solus. The rest of the statues are actually found in the crossroads. Now, this will start the quest called Regrets of the Dreadwolf, and I highly recommend you complete this quest. Now, a lot of these wolf statues are hidden in the crossroads behind those champion essence doors. So when you go to those areas where you'll find those doors, say for example, like this Lost Marks one, you'll then need to actually go and beat that champion wherever they are found out in the world. They'll give you that champion essence. You can then take that back to the door. It'll unlock the door, then complete whatever you need to do inside that. You'll get that wolf statue, take that back to the lighthouse, and you need to do that for all of the different murals. I really highly recommend you do that. It's very important, but I won't tell you exactly why. What I will also tell you is that there is a specific mission that really kicks off the story and makes a drastic change to one of the major cities. This mission is called A Warden's Best Friend. It happens pretty early in the game. By starting this mission, you are kicking off events that will make drastic changes to the worldscape. Now, avoiding spoilers as much as I can here, the Minrathous city and Treviso, they both have a faction vendor. Depending on the decisions you make at the end of that quest, one of those faction vendors will no longer be available to you. Now, what will happen then is you will lose access to, say, that unique or any specific items from that vendor. Say if they had like a gift that maybe you wanted to buy to give to one of your companions, right? Make sure you've done that before and cleared out any quests or anything that you want to do in that city before you complete this quest, as things will definitely change afterwards. However, much later in the story at that city, a new vendor will unlock for you, which is the Black Emporium that you may remember from previous Dragon Age games. These will have a unique inventory set of items that you can buy. Some of those will be similar to what you can get from that old faction vendor, but they will be different. So it's just something to point out there. If there is something specific you're looking for, or maybe there's a specific unique from one of those vendors that you want to make sure you get, make sure you either have got whatever you wanted to buy, or in the unique's case, you probably can't get it before this actual quest kicks off. So maybe make a different decision so that vendor's still available to you. But otherwise, like, there is a clearly marked point of no return much later in the game when like everything hits the fan. So you'll know when that occurs, but this one isn't marked and it does make a major change. So I wanted to call this out at the end here, but all right, let's start with Lace Harding. Harding is a rogue companion that you get at the very start of the game. Her gift, however, doesn't come until much later. You'll need to unlock the Black Emporium vendor, which is located at Docktown. Now, this will unlock just throughout the main story. The caretaker will eventually have a quest for you at the lighthouse. This will lead you directly to the Black Emporium, and then the gift can be found there. For the Veilguard skills here, at the end of Harding's storyline, the left option will lead you to the Inquisition Spotter Legendary Medium Armor. Now, what this does is all destinations are more likely to disrupt affected enemies, and this has a chance of disruptions applied to all enemies near a detonation as well. And the actual Veilguard skill is Heart of the Titan, so Soothing Potions cooldown duration is reduced by 15%, and Harding's detonation damage is increased by 25%. You and your other companion gain bonus 20% damage and 15% cooldown reduction. And the right option leads you to Titan's Vengeance. This gives detonations also apply bleeding. Detonations deal plus 25% physical damage versus enemies that are already bleeding. And the Stone's Vengeance is the Veilguard skill. Harding's weapon attacks are occasionally replaced with Titan Stones, and Titan Stones deal 20% increased damage and now apply bleeding. In terms of these choices, I do believe that the right option, the Titan's Vengeance and the Stone's Vengeance Veilguard skill, is the better overall option. It is a little build dependent, and there's definitely some that are even more build dependent in this, but detonations also applying bleeding plus dealing extra physical damage to targets that already have bleeding is fantastic. And then also the Titan Stones dealing that extra damage and applying bleeding. Like, status effects are so strong in Veilguard, especially bleeding and necrosis, so anytime you can apply that status effect will really do well for you. Before we move on to the next companion, I do want to mention here, if you want to talk about their other skills and just like different synergies, I have a video already about the companions that goes through all of that stuff. I don't want to rehash that here. I just want to focus on the new things in this video as sort of a companion piece to that one. So moving on to Balara. Now, Balara is a mage. She's also a part of the Veil Jumpers, and that's exactly where you get her gift from, the Veil Jumpers vendor in Arthurton Forest. For her Veilguard skill, when you complete her story, the left option gives you the Reborn Leathers. Now, detonations apply shock to all affected enemies, and detonations deal an additional 200 electric damage. And the Veilguard skill, Chain Lightning. Balara's weapon attacks Chain Lightning against shocked enemies, dealing 100 electricity damage, and the effect of shocks is 10% stronger. And the right option leads you to the Archivist Mail. Now, detonating a sundered enemy detonates another nearby sundered enemy, and enemies near the second detonation become vulnerable to electricity damage. And the Lingering Strike is the Veilguard skill. Balara's Replenish ability now applies Weakened in a 6-meter radius around you. Whenever Balara applies Weakened, it also deals 200 electric damage and renders the target shocked. Now, something to note with Balara here is that once you've completed her story, you won't actually get like that choice that leads you to get the Veilguard skill and the armor immediately after the story completes. She'll actually just be hanging around at the lighthouse one day. Like, you'll just return there, she'll just be chilling, and then you'll be able to make that choice and pick which one, whether it's left or right. So just something to note there. Now, the best option here is tough, as they're both really strong, especially if you are using electric damage and the shocked status effect. I typically tend to lean towards the right option because of the detonation benefits to, say, detonating multiple sundered enemies. Plus, then when you do apply Weakened, it does also apply electric damage and apply them to be shocked as well. So you get those additional benefits. But both of these are quite strong. I typically just seem to lean slightly to the right, but it's entirely up to you. Moving on to Nev, and we're going to talk about Nev and then Lucanus almost together because there is an important decision that will affect what options you get out of this. So starting off with Nev, she is a mage from the Shadow Dragons, and the Shadow Dragon vendor in Docktown is where you get her gift. Now, make sure you buy this gift and Lucanus's gift, which we'll talk about next, before you start a Warden's Best Friend quest that leads you to unlock Davrin as a companion. A decision that you make at the end of that quest that you have to make at that time will lock you out of either the Shadow Dragon vendor or the Antivan Crow vendor in Treviso. So you need to make that choice there, and that choice locks you out of one of these Veilguard skills. Another thing to note, if you chose to protect the other city compared to this one and you're locked into that one specific option, you won't get that Veilguard skill like immediately after you complete their quest. You'll actually need to go back and do some quests in that city, and like I think you need to complete like the overall arc of that faction. It seems like, I haven't 100% confirmed that on all of my playthroughs, but it does seem like you need to do that, and then you'll get an event trigger back at the lighthouse that'll give you the Veilguard skill for that specific companion. So speaking of Nev's Veilguard skills, the left option here will lead you to the Threader's Plates. Now, enemies remain sundered when detonated, but they can't be detonated again, and sundered effectiveness is increased by 20%. And the skill here is Winter's Wrath. Nev's critical damage is increased by 50%, and Nev's damaging abilities deal bonus 25% damage versus low health, and their cooldown reduction is reduced by 20%. And being very careful with spoilers here, when you make that choice at the end of a Warden's Best Friend, if you choose to
to protect Treviso rather than Docktown, that will lock you into that specific Veilguard skill that we just touched on. If you choose to protect Docktown, you'll then be able to have access to the second Veilguard skill for Neb, which is the Investigator's Robes. Detonation permanently reduces enemies' cold resistance, and detonations apply frozen if the target's cold resistance drops to 0, and the Cold Justice is the Veilguard skill. Maximum shield stacks increase by 1, and Nev's shield effectiveness increases by 2%, and her frozen duration increases by 100%. The right option here, the one that we just covered, is the better option here, especially if you're running some sort of cold build or leaning into those status effects. Chilled is a great status effect as it does slow enemies plus freezing enemies in place, stops them from attacking you. So like it's obviously fantastic as well. And being able to freeze enemies with detonations is also fantastic, but it is dependent on that decision you make. Now, speaking of that decision, the Lucanus side is the other side here. Lucanus is a rogue of the Antivan Crows, and the Antivan Crows vendor in Treviso is where you find his gift. Again, depending on that choice that you may get locked out of this vendor, so make sure you've bought the gift as soon as you get to that area and can actually buy it. For the Veilguard skill here, the left choice leads you to Crow's Tenacity. Now, detonations versus knocked down enemies also deal stagger to all enemies, and stagger from detonating is increased by 50% for each enemy hit. And the Veilguard skill, Demon of Defiance, Lucanus's critical damage increases by 50% and his detonation damage increases by 50%. Lucanus's abilities now do 25% more damage to enemies suffering from an affliction. And if you have chosen to protect Docktown rather than Treviso, you will be locked into that specific choice. However, if you do protect Treviso, you'll get the option for the second Veilguard skill and armor, which is Crow's Poise, one of my favorite looking armor sets in the game. Detonating an overwhelmed enemy detonates another overwhelmed enemy nearby, and enemies near the second detonation become vulnerable to necrotic damage. And the Veilguard skill here is Demon of Rebellion. Your resistance is increased by 10%, and the party's barrier damage is increased by 25%. This is a tough one in terms of which one is better. I like the Crow's Poise armor here better because it does detonate multiple enemies, plus it does apply vulnerability to necrotic damage, which Lucanus does do, and if you have a necrotic build, it's absolutely fantastic. However, Crow's Tenacity is still a solid armor set, but the Demon of Defiance Veilguard skill is significantly better than the Demon of Rebellion because your resistance being increased by 10% just lowers how much damage you take. That's kind of boring. Plus, barrier damage is super easy to clear. It's not that versatile, whereas increasing Lucanus's crit damage, his detonation damage, and the amount of damage his abilities do to enemies applied with an affliction, as pretty much every enemy is going to have an affliction in the game, is just significantly better than Demon of Rebellion. Speaking of a Warden's best friend, Davron is next. He's a warrior of the Grey Wardens. Now, the Grey Warden vendor in Hossberg Wetlands is where you get his gift. You will need to progress a certain part through the game before that vendor does become available and does sell the gift for you. Now, the two choices here, the left option for the Veilguard skill gives you the Wildwood Benefactor. Detonating staggered enemies deals stagger to all enemies, and stagger from detonating is increased by 10% for each enemy hit. And the Veilguard skill is Battle Master. Asan abilities deal 25% more damage, and when used, Asan abilities gain precision. And the right option here gives you the Grey Benefactor. Detonation damage is now dealt as fire damage and deal 25% more fire damage for each stack of burning on the target. And the skill here is Defender. Asan's abilities have a 25% shorter cooldown duration, and when used, Asan abilities grant Deflect. Now, personally, the right option here is the better armor set, as detonations then now apply fire damage, and there are Darkspawn everywhere in this game, and they are weak to fire. Plus, dealing 25% more fire damage for each stack of burning on the target is perfect if you do have a fire-based build. However, if you do have a stagger-based build, then the left option is probably better for that sort of specific setup. Plus, the Veilguard skill there is a little bit stronger, but generally across the board, the right option is the one I would be picking. Moving on to Tash. She is a warrior of the Lords of Fortune, and the Lords of Fortune vendor is found in the Hall of Valor, which is where you find her gift. The left option for her Veilguard skill gives you all detonations apply burning to all affected enemies, and detonations deal an additional 150% fire damage if the target is already burning. And the Veilguard skill here is Tasha's critical damage increases by 50%, with damage versus high health increased by 25%. And Tasha's burning now deals 50% more damage on the initial hit and reduces by 10% for each subsequent hit. The right choice gives you an armor set that detonating a weakened enemy detonates another nearby weakened enemy, and the second detonation now applies to all nearby weakened enemies, not just one. And the Veilguard skill skill Kanari's Focus, Tasha's weapon attack damage increased by 50% with a 20% reduction in cooldown duration, and Tasha's burning duration increased by 2 seconds. The left option here is the stronger option because of all of that additional fire damage and the burning benefits, especially if you have a fire build. If you don't have a fire-based build, I would lean the right option, especially if you are using Tash to detonate the weakened effect. Like, that is very, very strong, and then you still get some benefits from her burning status effect that she can apply. Last but not least is our Necromancer Emmerich. He is a mage of the Morn Watchers. Now, his gift is found at the Morn Watch vendor in the Necropolis halls. That'll become available to you as soon as you unlock Emmerich. The left option for his Veilguard skill leads you to an armor set that detonations deal plus 50% damage versus health while you are at low health. Detonations grant you invulnerable while you are at low health, and the Veilguard skill Life's Embrace. Your low health threshold is now increased by 10%, and the party deals 50% more damage while you have low health. And the right option leads you to an armor set that detonating a sundered enemy applies Quietus, which is his unique status effect that is essentially necrosis. And if detonated, enemies already have necrosis or Quietus deal 200 necrotic damage, and Death's Caress is the Veilguard skill. All of Emmerich's abilities apply necrosis when dealing damage, and the party's affliction damage is increased by 25%. The right option here is significantly stronger here because it does help you apply these status effects, and the party's affliction damage being increased by 25% is fantastic, especially for necrotic builds here. It's very, very strong. Even if you're using, say, a burning or a shock build, whatever it is, anything that's applying afflictions, that extra damage of just a flat 25% is fantastic. There is a couple of builds where the left option is good, like those low health thresholds. There's a couple of like low health builds that would benefit from that, but for the most part, the right option is the better option here. The last thing I want to touch on today is how to romance a companion. Now, essentially just flirting with them when the option appears will lead you down that like initial romantic path. Now, you'll get a quest at some point where the companion will be needing to make a choice, and if you've been quite flirtatious with them, there will be an option there to commit to a romance with that companion, and then you'll essentially be committed to that companion. Something to note here is that once you've entered a relationship with one companion, you'll lose all the flirt options and the romance options with all the other companions. You'll just be committed to that one. Now, during the final act of the game, like after the point of no return, there is a spicy scene with that companion that you have chosen. You'll be able to get that once you do return to your room at one point. You'll get a nice little spicy scene, and then you'll progress towards the end of the game. We'll start with the first one, which is the main one that you'll probably get. Now, this all comes from a quest called The Regrets of the Dread Wolf. The most spoiler-free way of explaining this is to just complete that quest, and you will get this first option at the very end, which will unlock a certain ending for you. But to give you a little bit more information here, this is all linked to these wolf statues that you can find throughout the crossroads and other ways as well. Now, these wolf statues, you'll initially get the first two pretty early in the game, simply by doing the soulless memories that you can run into in the crossroads. At the very end of those, you'll notice a statue will spawn and you'll be able to pick it up. Initially, you won't know what to do with these until you meet the Inquisitor for that first time. Here, he'll actually give you the third statue, and it will unlock the ability to actually do something with these. Now, what you need to do is at the lighthouse, you can interact with the murals in the main lobby. Now, everyone that you interact with, you'll get a scene that'll give you some serious lore about Solus and the past of Dragon Age lore in general. And after that, you'll talk to your companions for a little bit, and then you'll be able to move on. Now, the final two wolf statues are actually found at the crossroads, but you need to defeat a particular champion in order to unlock their gates. The first champion is the Docktown one, and the second one is the one in the Arlethan Forest, and that area doesn't unlock until a little bit later in the game, so don't worry too much if you can't get that one initially. Now, once you've beaten both of those champions, you'll take those champion essences back to the crossroads, unlock those doors. There'll be a various puzzle that you'll have to complete in order to get the final statues. Once you've done that, you can then take them back to the lighthouse and complete the mural paintings, and then the caretaker will appear and tell you that someone is waiting for you in the crossroads. Now, if you just want to follow the rest of that questline on your own without spoiling what happens next, go and do that and skip to this timestamp on screen if you want to know how to unlock the post-credits scene. But for those that do want to know what happens next, once you go to the crossroads, you'll meet Morrigan there. Morrigan will tell you some juicy information about Mythol, that she is now containing a fragment of Mythol inside herself after the events of the end of Inquisition, and that there is another fragment of Mythol in in the crossroads. She will then unlock the doorway to go and interact with that fragment of Mythol. Now, it is possible here to convince her to give you her fragment without actually fighting her, but either way, whether you do that or not, you get the same outcome. You get that fragment, and then you'll use that fragment at the very end of the game, and we'll circle back to what actually happens then at the end of this video. Unlocking the post-credit scene is not necessarily linked to a quest, but there are quests that revolve around it. It's actually linked to these mysterious circles that you can find. There are 3 of these in the game. The first one is found in the Arlethan Forest on a small island that also contains a unique chest. In order to reach this, you'll need to shine the lasers into like the little laser hole thingies to unlock the pathway to the island. You'll get the unique quest, and then behind that is actually where you find the little circly thing that you'll need to click on, and then a voice will talk to you. When you hear that voice talking, you know you've actually done it right. There is also a note that it gives you, which gives you some juicy lore information as well. The second mysterious circle is actually found in the Necropolis halls. This is linked to a quest called Pinnacle of Its Kind. Now, this will initially send you to 3 different regions to go and defeat a demon. Once you have done that, you will then return to the Necropolis halls, unlock this door, and then you'll need to fight the Formless One dragon in the center of that area. After you have done that, you'll have various hordes like around the room. In one of those areas, and I'm showing you which one here on the map, you'll actually be able to find the second orb, and you'll know you've clicked the right one again when a mysterious voice does talk to you again. The final mysterious circly thing is found in the Crossroads. Now, you must finish the Crossroads quest, the Heart of Corruption, in order to do this. This is that quest that requires you to essentially beat all of the champions and then beat all the revenants. Those revenant essences you can then take to that main island on the Crossroads. This will then unlock that final revenant dragon fight, and at the end of that fight, after the caretaker unlocks that door after the fight, just follow the pathway left rather than going back to the dock, and you'll actually find the last circle there. You again will know you've done the right thing once the mysterious voice does talk to you, and that's all you need to do. Once you've got all 3 of those, you'll then be able to continue on your merry way and actually go about completing the game. Now, if you are too lazy to do these steps yourself, you just want to know what these scenes are, you're in luck, because I'm going to show you those scenes very shortly. But the first scene is actually unlocked as by selecting a specific ending. When you do pick up the dagger, you'll see that in the scene, and the second scene occurs automatically after the credits have rolled if you have met the conditions that we just spoke about. Looking for more? I have 2 builds for each of the classes, plus plenty of other guides for Dragon Age The Veilguard. Thank you for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.